Hello, it is Ryan, and we could all use an extra bright spot in our day, couldn't we? Just to make up for things like sitting in traffic, doing the dishes, counting your steps, you know, all the mundane stuff. That is why I'm such a big fan of Chumba Casino. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere with daily bonuses. That should brighten your day a little. Actually, a lot. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com. That's ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
You are now listening to the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.
Hi there, my name is Walter Chaw. I am the senior film critic and editor for FilmFreakCentral.net, and I've been asked by the fine folks at Deaf Crocodile to come talk about this amazing, once was lost, now is found film, Solomon King. Let's get started. We open here with a mad, enthusiastic, passionate rantings of Prince Hassan, played by Richard Scarso. I want to take a minute just to say that the cast of this film is comprised mostly of non-professional actors, friends of the director, Sal Watts' family members as well. And curiously enough, at one point, San Francisco Giants legendary infield Tito Fuentes makes an appearance here as well. Members of the community would have recognized themselves in this film, in the Oakland community, the black community in particular. It was very much a work of passion, a work of self-aggrandizement from a professional businessman. He was the guy who, Sal Watts, who was the very definition of self-made. He was born in Canton, Mississippi. He made it through to the 11th grade, which was described by his widow Belinda as quite an achievement, actually, for someone with Mr. Watts' background during this period of time, and always had dreams of bigger things. He wanted bigger things. He felt like he deserved bigger things, and he worked really hard to make that happen for himself. He moved out to Oakland, California. He opened several different businesses at the same time: an ice cream stand, a clothing store, a record store. During this opening here, where Manny, the brother of the titular Solomon King, who will be played by Sal Watts, Manny here played by little Jamie Watts, Saul Watts' brother, not flesh and blood brother, but the man who ran his clothing store and with whom they had a really close relationship. He says, as soon as we took over, me and my brother Solomon, this oil field, we increased production by 60%. It's the way a businessman would talk, and so Sal Watts, there's a lot of him, obviously, in this film. This is a Maserati Ghibli coupe, probably from 1967. I was trying to compare different models, but it has kind of it looks like a custom hood, but it could just be from 1967. I'm not really sure, but it's a really sweet little car. This is the car that Sal Watts bought for his wife, Belinda, at some point. I guess she felt like she wanted a fast car, and she said, "Hey, I want that." She remembers it being about $7,000, and Sal Watts was like, "Anything for my baby." So he bought her this really nice, beautiful Maserati, premium condition, of course, in 1967. I'm not sure that's a real car phone, but I think I like the way that he's using it there. But so here he is in Oakland, and he's working himself to death, really. He's doing everything that he can to get ahead, and he, inspired by the blaxploitation movement that's happening in American cinema right now, and it's a movement that we'll talk about a little bit more in a second, he decides that he's going to make a movie. So in addition to all of the things that he is, all the different hats that he's already wearing, he's going to make a film. Now, in addition to those things, in addition to the ice cream stand, the clothing store, the record store, he dabbled a little bit in music production. He also had a television show on local channel 20 in Oakland called Soul Is. It was a variety show, and through that he met a lot of people, passing through a lot of artists, passing through, including Mantan Moreland, the great African American actor, and through Mantan's encouragement and a little bit of tutelage in how to shoot a film, Sal Watts sort of decided, why not? I should be able to do this as well. And so he started writing the script, and over the course of several months, he got together the funds, he got together a cast, he put together a film, he put it together. It never seemed to occur to him, as it occurs to so many people who are wanting to make a movie, that, why don't I just stop talking about it and start doing it? And that seems to epitomize Sal Watts's life, his motto, if you will. It's easy, I think, to dismiss this movie out of hand for its amateurishness, its sort of jerky editing, its kitchen sink mentality, and obvious low budget. I look at it differently. I look at this movie as inspirational, truly inspirational. It's a film that shouldn't probably exist, should have certainly probably not have survived. That it does exist, that it is still here is remarkable, and it is more than just a curiosity or something that we can patronize and say, oh, isn't that great that he did something great. I think there's actually real value to this film in terms of what it has to say about the time that it was made, what it has to say about how little things perhaps have changed for us in the modern conversation around a lot of these issues. And, the stuff that we look at immediately that feels funny to us, if it feels like an artifact of camp or what have you, I think if we're more careful in our analysis of it, we can really pull true value from this, sociological value from this film that would otherwise go ignored because it's distracting to watch a movie that is not perhaps as polished as we're used to. And so it's also fair to question whether or not the things that we'll be talking about today were intended. And I think, for the most part, they probably were intended. And I'll start by saying, the Princess San, played by Richard Scarso in the very opening, obviously he's not a Middle Eastern guy. He's not, despite the turban and all the obvious historical offense of having somebody in brown face essentially opening the film. If we look at that rather as an example of a white person stealing from his own father in the story of the film, from King Hassan. So Princess San is stealing from his own father, embezzling money from oil, and he's doing it at the expense of these brothers, at the expense of Manny and Solomon King, who are black, who are African American, and he's blaming them for it, and he's being probably believed for it, and because of this subterfuge being found out, now as a consequence of that, this white guy essentially has to kill the black people that he's been blaming for a crime, when in reality it's the black people who are responsible for the business succeeding 60% above whatever it was that they were making before. This is O'Malley, by the way. He's a CIA director or agent. He used to work with Solomon King. O'Malley is played by a guy named Louis Zito. But I think tellingly, O'Malley thinks of Solomon King as an equal, even though he will refer to him with the N-word in a moment. It's out of respect. Not the N-word itself, but he says he's really smart. They are establishing not only Solomon King's work ethic, his ability to do a good job when he's asked to do a good job, running an oil field, I guess. They're demonstrating that he was a CIA agent. He was trusted with the protection of our country. And in real life, Sal Watts spent a tour in Vietnam. He was a paratrooper with 33 jumps. He tells the story of actually driving at one point for General Westmoreland. He doesn't talk very much about his experiences in Vietnam, but certainly no one really escaped that war completely free. But the idea of Solomon King as a defender of this country which doesn't really respect or love him, and he is always in the process of betraying him and holding him down, is a fascinating one to me for them to be exploring. So immediately in the first 10 minutes of this film, we have this idea that white men are betraying black men, and that not only black men, but Solomon King, who fought for this country, who protected this country, who is really ethical in every way that the white men in this movie are not ethical. Here is the introduction. We sort of see her from behind early on, but we'll get more of her as we go through, of Princess Oniba, played by Claudia Russo. It's not clear what her ethnicity is. Obviously, she's meant to be Middle Eastern, but she's obviously, again, not, at least not to my eye. And later, there will be a line that refers to her as light-skinned or white-skinned. And the taboo that's being broken with Solomon King here, the miscegenation taboo with Solomon King wooing her and the two of them becoming lovers. His wife, Belinda Burton, who will appear at the very end of this film, was also the product of a biracial marriage. And so all of these things, these casting decisions that we could dismiss offhand by saying that those are the only people I could find. But these people, Richard Scarso as Prince Hassan and Claudia Russo as Princess Oniba, are conscious choices. They are the products of casting, of a thought process, and they're both white. Essentially white. And so the themes of miscegenation, the theme of black people in the United States being oppressed by white people, are prominent in this film instantly, just by dint of the casting, and a little bit even by the dialogue. So very quickly, we were only 10 minutes into this movie at this point. All of these things are, I think, well established as prevailing themes for the rest of the film. So this movie made its premiere at the Oakland Paramount Theater on Broadway in Oakland. It's a theater that's known for the Art Deco design of its architecture by an architect named Timothy L. Pfluger. It was one of the first Depression-era buildings to incorporate and integrate the work of numerous creative artists into its architecture, and is particularly noteworthy for successful orchestration of the various artistic disciplines into an original, harmonious whole. I got that from the website for the Oakland Paramount Theater on Broadway. The first movie to show there was a Kay Francis film called The False Madonna in 1931. It was restored in 1973 after a few years of neglect by the Oakland Symphony, which played there, and also the city of Oakland. It was declared a sort of a historical landmark, and so a year after that, Solomon King had its single night debut. You'll if you're a native of Oakland, you'll recognize all of these places where they shot, and so many movies are shot in San Francisco, so many movies are shot in Los Angeles. Shooting a film in Oakland is unusual, and so there's value even in that, I think. There's a trip, I think, at one point to a place called Della's China Cup Cafe that used to be at 7309 MacArthur Boulevard, and it was famous for its enormous teacup collection. All right, so as the first fight sequence unfolds in this film, and I love the inventiveness of this, the way that it's edited and put together, and this guy here who just has to hike up his trousers before he just starts wailing on this dude. As we let this unfold, let's talk a little bit about blaxploitation and how it began in the late 1960s, early 1970s, as I would argue a genre. Many people would call it a movement, I think, but I think it's as much of a genre as film noir, although it's not given nearly the same kind of respect, obviously, academically or culturally, as film noir has been. I think it's due for a reconsideration. People like Spike Lee and Quentin Tarantino are chiefly responsible for us beginning to take blaxploitation more seriously. Whatever you think of those men's films, I happen to like both of them. I think they're both important filmmakers, not just good filmmakers, but that they both believe that blaxploitation is a valuable genre in American cinema, and it rises concurrently with the new Hollywood cinema, or the film brats, or the paranoid decade, or whatever you would call it, that began with Bonnie and Clyde and Easy Rider at the end of the 60s. And really what was happening was that the studio system was in trouble. Studios were in trouble. They were being actually taken as tax write-offs for shoe companies and stuff. Warner Brothers, I think, at one point was that. And so all of a sudden, Easy Rider makes a ridiculous amount of money, and none of the producers really, they're aging out, and they knew that. They didn't understand what the kids these days wanted to see anymore. I think it's important to remember that the decade of the 60s is interesting because it's literally the children of the Ozzie and Harriet and the Leave It to Beaver era are having kids, and those kids are turning out to be Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin. So in the space of a very, very short period of time, the sort of generational mutation, contraction has happened. And the gulf between what even the beginning of the 60s and the end of the 60s meant for us as a culture was titanic, was huge. I mean, the parents of this generation grew up listening to like Tin Pan Alley and buying sheet music, and the kids of that generation are listening to Elvis, my God, and worse. All of these, crucially mutating factors are happening during this period of time. So when Easy Rider happens, and there's Steppenwolf on the soundtrack, and there's all this, bikers and LSD and pot and communes, what is happening? And I think studio executives at that time had this idea that they had no idea what was going on, but they sure still liked money. And so they began to turn to these young filmmakers, the first generation of filmmakers coming out of film school, and saying, hey, you guys, why don't you guys make some movies for a while? And we're just going to give you a little bit of money and give you a lot of control, and we're going to trust you to make something. And so they started making movies like Bonnie and Clyde and The Godfather, and looky, suddenly we have a film industry that's based on these creative decisions. Blaxploitation rises concurrently with this. The three major factors that are usually cited for blaxploitation are the historic, obviously, misrepresentation of blacks on film, the civil rights movement, which is still going, but has taken some pretty serious lumps at the end of the 60s, and Hollywood's financial difficulties. One of the serious lumps that I think is not mentioned enough when we talk about the state of the world then and the state of the world now, even, are the assassinations of essentially every major civil rights leader at the time. Well, every is a tough thing to prove, but major civil rights leaders: Fred Hampton, crucially, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., Bobby Kennedy, Medgar Evers, Harriet and Harry Moore, Herbert Lee, the Reverend Bruce Clunder, the three kids down in Mississippi: James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, Michael Henry Schwerner. The search for justice for them was portrayed in Alan Parker's Mississippi Burning. Jimmy Lee Jackson, who was a voting rights act, the murder of whom was the inspiration for the Voting Rights Act and for the Selma Montgomery March. Vernon Ferdinand Dahmer, Horlet Jackson, Samuel Hammond Jr., Delano Middleton, and Henry Smith, who were protesting at South Carolina State College when they were shot by police. Everyone remembers Kent State because those were white kids that were shot, but not as many people remember those kids that were murdered by our police force, which was, of course, created to return escaped slaves to their owners. Return escaped enslaved peoples to their owners, I should say. I'm trying not to use slave as a noun anymore. But anyway, all these assassinations happening upon one another gave a pretty clear message, I think, that has persisted to the current day, that if you're progressive in the United States, conservatives will murder you. And I think we still see this real reluctance for the left in the United States to embrace progressiveness, not the least for which that they were our greatest hopes were murdered in the 1960s. So all of these things are happening now, and all of a sudden, with filmmakers given a little bit more leash to do what they will, African American filmmakers took the leash and ran with it. And in 1970, there are 70 through into 71. There are three major films that are sort of located at the very beginning of blaxploitation. Two by Melvin Van Peebles and one by Ozzie Davis. Melvin Van Peebles made a movie for Columbia called Watermelon Man that came out on May 27th, 1970. In it, a white man in suburbia with a good job as an insurance agent wakes up one morning to find himself black. Melvin Van Peebles based his story on Kafka's Metamorphosis, obviously, and he during the course of the film Watermelon Man, you should really see it, but he is reassigned to the inner city to find new clients. He is treated differently by his wife, eventually left by his wife. All of these things that we think of as socially progressives, right, are happen in this film, are portrayed brilliantly by Melvin Van Peebles in this movie. But the studio kind of got nervous, and so took over the editing of it, and the I think the last 30 minutes or so of it are a little bit hard to follow because they try to insert all of these weak endings, let's say, that forgive white culture a little bit, but the final shot, I think, of the film is Melvin Van Peebles's, and it is of his hero joining the Black Panthers and training for, we think, a revolution to come. He took his experiences from Columbia and an offer for a multi-picture deal, and he said, no, thank you. Watermelon Man did okay. He said, no, thank you. I'm going to make my own movie, and he put together a movie called Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song, which came out in 1971. It was rated X, mainly, even though there is some sex in it. It was given that rating because he refused to submit the film to the MPAA for judgment, essentially. And when you refuse to get your film rated, they give you an X rating. And so he used that as promotional material on the poster. It says rated X by an all-white jury. He knew exactly what he was doing, exactly who his audience was. He avoided union rules. He shot illegally, quote unquote, without permits. He said that he was making a porn film whenever someone would ask, and so that stuff wasn't so regulated, and so he was allowed to continue. Sweet Sweetback is extraordinary. It begins with a dedication. It says, this film is dedicated to all the brothers and sisters who have had enough of the man. His hero, that is played by him, by Melvin Van Peebles, beats two cops to death with his handcuffs, with his chains, essentially. And the symbolism of blaxploitation, when it's the best, when it's great, has moments like this, where in the Defiant Ones you have Chains talking about how the white man and the black man are the same. It's a really well-meaning film by Stanley Kramer, starring Sidney Poitier and Tony Curtis, but you kind of corny. You roll your eyes. In 1971, how far away are we from that now? 50 years now? That we are the image of a black man beating two policemen to death with his shackles is still stunning and important. The other film from 1970 that came out at the beginning of this movement is a movie called Cotton Comes to Harlem. And it's based on a book series by Chester Himes about two African-American detectives Coffin Ed Johnson and Gravedigger Jones. They're played by Raymond St. Jacques and Godfrey Cambridge in the film, then directed by Ossie Davis. It cost about $1.2 million to make, and it grossed almost $5 million. So they kind of had an idea that they had something there. People started to pay attention to this. And 86% of the audience, crucially, 86% of the audience for Cotton Comes to Harlem was African American. And so here was this big untapped market, theretofore untapped. It also introduced Cleavon Little and Red Fox to the movie screens. It inspired a sequel called Come Back, Charleston Blue in 1972. I think not as successful, but pretty good as well. Both of them really well worth watching. Pause here a little bit to take in what's happening in Solomon King. Here's the seduction sequence. We'll have a flash of nudity as Solomon plies his charms on Princess Oniba. A little bit gross because he says early on, "I remember when you were little," or "You sure have grown." And I always think of Star Wars Episode 2 when that happens. It's not ideal. But here it's happening. And it's one of the conventions, I think, of blaxploitation is to explore black sexuality. The other themes are hyper-masculine hero or hyper-feminine heroine in the case of Pam Grier's great films. There's a disdain of and violence towards white people. There's usually drugs involved at some point, although there are no drugs involved in this film. Pointedly, I think Sal Watts thought of himself as principled in that way. He wasn't going to make a movie about that. He wasn't going to make a movie in Harlem or in L.A. He was going to go stay in Oakland, his home, his adopted home, and he wasn't going to have a lot of sex. There would be a sexual subplot, but he wasn't going to go all in as Melvin Van Peebles does in Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song. His hero in that film is named Sweetback because he's so good at sex. In fact, he escapes from his shackles, completely. The shackles that are sort of hanging off of him after he's beaten two cops to death with them, by trading freedom from the shackles with a woman in exchange for some of that great sex. So there's a real modesty to this film, really, that I kind of find charming. I really think there's an innocence to this film. There's a joy of creation in this film that's irrepressible. If you rewound the film a little bit back to the sequence where Princess Oniba is showing herself to be hopeless in the kitchen, you have a scene where Sal Watts is looking off camera at nothing. That makes sense within the film, but we know he's probably looking at a crew member cracking up or somebody just off screen, and there's a little smile on his face. He can't hide it. He thinks it's ridiculous. He thinks it's funny, and he knows it's funny, and it's there. It's captured on the film. It's like when they break character on Saturday Night Live or something. There's an authenticity about that. Those are favorite moments for a reason. That there's something genuine about that. You could go the other way and say, "Hey, that's super amateurish," but yes, it is, and I think that's fascinating. So, even though we're talking about these three films as the beginning of blaxploitation, Watermelon Man, Cotton Comes to Harlem, Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song, and indeed they are the big ones. Sweet Sweetback was made on a $150,000 budget and it grossed $15 million. It's sort of Blair Witch Project-like in terms of how monumental it was as a movement, as a mutating factor in American filmmaking decision making anyway. But just like Blair Witch Project, I think immediately the imitators of these films were driven by a less pure, obviously, ideal or motive. They were driven purely, a lot of them were, just by profit of the most cynical kind. I interviewed Melvin Van Peebles several years ago upon the release of a docudrama done by his son Mario Van Peebles about the making of Sweet Sweetback. And he said about blaxploitation, he said, "Yeah, it's true that I was disappointed in the direction of that genre as a movement. Think about Shaft was the movie that saved MGM after Sweetback did its business. They turned around this white guy script and made it into a black guy script. I mean, listen seriously. The only color in Hollywood is green, and they were seeing a lot of green after my movie took in all that money. But what was missing is that you'd watch Sweetback with an audience that they were just dead silent. They were stunned, man. You could hear a rat pissing on cotton. Blaxploitation took that political message and suppressed it. They made it a caricature. And where before colored folks in pictures were either acting the fool or singing, now they were just acting out the new anti-hero stereotypes. We traded in one thing for another thing. Just some more of the same." Van Peebles echoes a lot of the concerns at the time about blaxploitation films and the explosion of blaxploitation films that happened after Sweet Sweetback. The first of which was Shaft, which was a huge, directed by Gordon Parks and starring Richard Roundtree. It was a huge success. A huge success. It did gangbusters business, and it inspired 2 sequels. It immediately caused African-American activists and academics to express concern. In 1972, the president of the Beverly Hills branch of the NAACP, Junius Griffin, was interviewed in Variety, and he accidentally coined the term blaxploitation by, pushing together, making a monogreen of black and exploitation. He said that it was proliferating offenses, so this genre was. Let me read a little bit more of what he had to say. He said that black exploitation in films has reached devastating proportions. We must tell both white and black movie producers that we will not tolerate the continued warping of our black children's minds with the filth, violence, and cultural lies that are all pervasive in current productions of so-called black movies. So the movies he's talking about, and this was kind of a direct reaction to a movie called Superfly, but just in a very short period of time, hundreds of movies, between 1970 and 1975, hundreds and hundreds of movies were made that sort of fall into the blaxploitation category. It was a boom of films. Movies like Melinda and Trouble Man, which has an extraordinary score by Marvin Gaye. Hitman, The Legend of N-Word Charlie, which inspired a sequel called The Soul of N-Word Charlie. Hammer, Across 110th Street, Black Mama, White Mama. Slaughter, which also got a sequel called Slaughter's Big Ripoff. Superfly, which is incredible and got actually I think a really solid remake a few years ago. A movie called Three the Hard Way, which is really actually quite great. A fascinating Exorcist ripoff called Abby, and I don't even know that it's really a ripoff. It's distinguished because it uses a West African god named Eshu, demon named Eshu, who was the god of demon of chaos and whirlwinds, and also a trickster and a guardian of roads, particularly crossroads, which I think is fascinating because of the Robert Johnson story. Uptown Saturday Night is great. Five on the Black Hand, Cooley High, Cornbread Earl and Me, Black Caesar, which got a sequel called Hell Up in Harlem, Detroit 9000, which is really amazing. And, if you love Solomon King, as you do now, since you're also listening to a commentary track about it, you should catch a movie called Gordon's War, starring Paul Winfield, which is also about a team of Vietnam vets getting together to avenge a dead wife. Blackula, which is better than you think, better than it's been portrayed. It's much more than just Black Dracula. It's actually about 2 enslaved people going to Dracula's castle to demand to be freed from their enslavement, and Dracula, for their troubles, turns Blackula into Blackula. And the sequel, Scream, Blackula Scream, which I think in many ways is superior from the original. There is a fascinating suppressed film called The Spook Who Sat by the Door, which I think Spike Lee took a lot of stylistic cues from for his Black Klansman Pam Grier becomes a superstar in movies like Coffee and Cleopatra Jones. There's a really rough film called The Mac, which is great, that you see them watching, I think, at the end of True Romance. Hell Up in Harlem. Oh, there's Foxy Brown. There's another Pam Grier film. That one is famous, I think, in my mind anyway, for her pulling a gun out of her afro at one point. Black Belt Jones, Dolomite, which has gotten some more attention because Eddie Murphy did that sort of movie for Netflix a couple years ago. That's great. Black Belt Jones, Space is the Place, Three the Hard Way. Among all of these, many of these I think are masterpieces of the genre. But also many of them I think are masterpieces of the new Hollywood. There's Bill Gunn's Ganja and Hess from 1973, which is a vampire film that's kind of more about vampirism as a viral contagion. And of course, every immigrant population in the United States deals with this idea that they are dirty in some way or the carrier of virus. The question, I think, rightfully raised about why I was asked to do this is that, obviously I'm not African American, I'm Asian American, but there is a strong connection between Asian American cinema, exploitation cinema, you could say, during this period of time, the martial arts, kung fu, chop socky stuff, the wuxia stuff, and the African American culture and community as well that adopted this. These stories of revenge, these stories of alien cultures, if you will, finding strength and solidarity through the product of their own hands is poignant to me. You see it in Enter the Dragon, you see it in some of those movies, but also, in modernity with stuff like Wu-Tang Clan. That doesn't happen without some real cultural empathy and bleed through. I think one of the great tragedies is the effectiveness of the mainstream culture and pitting African Americans against Asian Americans with the model minority myth, among other things. And it's really a tragedy because together we could be so strong. But anyway, Ganja and Hess's deals with contagion and immigrant fear in a brilliant, experimental, almost psychedelic kind of way. It stars Dwayne Jones in his only other starring role outside of George Romero's Night of the Living Dead from 1968, which, I was expressing a little bit of ambiguity about the 1970 date as the beginning of blaxploitation, because really I think Night of the Living Dead may be the beginning of the exploitation genre for me, if I was to, and nobody has, but if anyone ever did, I would say it begins with Night of the Living Dead, because that is a story of a black man shacking up in a barn with a white woman, in a farmhouse with a white woman, in the middle of nowhere, America, hillbilly America, as a bunch of slow-moving white people try to kill them, and finally, spoiler alert, succeed by the end. So, yeah, we start there. But if you've not seen Ganja and Hess, please do. It was remade by Spike Lee as The Sweet Blood of Jesus just a few years ago. I would also throw a movie like Blazing Saddles into the pot as a great blaxploitation film in its focus, its absolute laser focus on the ridiculousness of racism. Truck Turner is a movie from this period of time you should see, starring Yaphet. He's got the best death scene ever in a film in Truck Turner. Bone, the first movie by Larry Cohen in 1972, has an extraordinary performance by Yaphet, and also a really dynamite and dangerous storyline about the perception of black men. Yaphet plays Bone, who breaks into a upscale suburban couple's house and threatens to rape the wife, saying, "That's what you expect of me anyway, isn't it? That's my role here." But in among all of these things, you have the hyperviolence, you have the hypersexuality, you have the portrayal of drug dealers and pimps as being heroes. And you show almost uniformly, which is what one of the major objections to this from the black community was, this genre movement in the black community was to portraying black communities as just criminal, just full of things falling down, and so objections well noted, and it began to hurt a little bit the production of films. That and Jaws in 1975 changed the direction of the new Hollywood for everyone. Studio heads began to say, you know what, we make a movie like Jaws or Star Wars in 1977, there's a good percentage of that audience is also black, so do we really have to be making this stuff? Do the real hyper-energized and very culturally specific soundtracks and the clothing styles and the hairstyles and the black creators? Do we have to be indulging that when we have stuff like this that works maybe just as well? And how about Sounder, which, off a budget of $1.9 million, made $16.9 million, directed by Martin Rett. Don't get whiter than Martin Rett, or Lady Sings the Blues. That didn't make all that much money. It was on a budget of $16 million. It made about $20 million, but it did get 5 Oscar nominations. It did get some mainstream critical acceptance. So do we really have to be dealing with the genre that none of us like or understand anyway, when we could actually be making a lot of money from the black community, which is angry anyway, it seems like, about this stuff? And so throughout the course of the rest of the 70s, by 1975 on, production went down, box office went down. You still see flashes of it, and I think you still see a lot of compelling examples of the influence of blaxploitation as a genre and not a movement, a genre, an artistic genre. In movies even like Alien at the end of the decade with 1978, where Yaphet Kotto again turns up as a blue-collar miner with his buddy Harry Dean Stanton, arguing about pay and bonuses and fairness. And there's Jamie Foxx's Electro character in the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man sequel. He is, for me, a really remarkable interpretation of the main character of Ralph Ellison's The Invisible Man, with his control of electricity and his feeling like, in the dialogue of that film for Jamie Foxx, that he's invisible in the midst of this sort of huge white corporate structure. So you see, of course, Django Unchained, you see it in a couple of parody films like I'm Gonna Get You, Sucko, with the Wayans brothers, and the really quite brilliant Undercover Brother, directed by Malcolm D. Lee, Spike Lee's cousin. And of course, there's always the great Spike Lee, one of the great American directors, maybe along with like a Scorsese or a Coppola, the most important American director still working right now, with stuff like The Five Bloods, which is reminiscent. There's an echo anyway in some ways with Solomon King and its portrayal of Vietnam vets and the real damage that this country has done to the people who have the black people, the minorities, and the underprivileged who were enlisted in that war. What this country has done to us, to them. And if you're not familiar, obviously, with Spike Lee, I would really recommend that you do. His film Bamboozled is, in particular, an often overlooked film in his filmography. For a long time, by me, even, I think because it's so uncomfortable, and the places it goes are so taboo that the first instinct is to reject, and so I did for the longest time until revisited within the last few years and found another masterpiece to go with the rest of them. So the echo of blaxploitation is
Ryan Seacrest here. When you have a busy schedule, it's important to maximize your downtime. One of the best ways to do that is by going to ChumbaCasino.com. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino games like spin slots, bingo, and solitaire that you can play for free for a chance to redeem some serious prizes. So hop on to ChumbaCasino.com now and live the Chumba life. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Loud, and the ripples are wide-ranging and deep. So I think we are overdue for real, serious, critical studies of blaxploitation as a genre. So a pause on the history there to just note, look at the fabulous fashion here. And most of this was provided by Sal Watts's clothing store. But what a remarkable, I think, time capsule of this place and time, and also more evidence into Sal Watts' resourcefulness. This office is one of his offices of his business. He shot at locations that he could steal footage from. He shot at locations where that was always available to him because they were owned by him or owned by his neighbors and owned by his family. Really a labor of love. Really kind of remarkable to see that. There's Della's Cafe with all the teacups. When it did finally close down, she donated the owner of the store, and that might have been her, Della Hardman Guess, who ran it from 1967 until about 1999. She donated 50 of the teacups from her collection, and it was a big enough collection. I think there was 3,620 of them. She donated 50 of the more unusual teacups to the Oakland Museum of California. It was a big enough collection that Ripley's Believe It or Not had a section in it for her. And I really love the scene here with the kids eating chicken. It's so natural because it is natural. I don't think this is staged. Or if it is staged, it's not more than just, hey kids, you want lunch? I'm going to buy everybody here some chicken. And they're sitting here talking, and there's this like completely unrehearsed. You're going to have moments of magic like this throughout the course of a movie that's been made in this seat of your pants kind of way. There's going to be some bad acting, I would say, but there's also going to be lots of unforced, just representational moments. These people being who they are at this moment in time. Okay, another great moment here when they burst in on a real-life Reverend, the Reverend C.B. Lyons, as he's lying on bed. Now, the good Reverend Lyons, bless his heart, is a little bit corpulent. And there's a theme, I think. There's a running motif that goes through many blaxploitation films, and indeed films throughout the 70s, in which the institutions which we have been trained, schooled, instructed to follow and to respect are no longer respectable or followable. And this is, of course, in the wake of Watergate, in the wake of Vietnam, police brutality, and quelling protests to the modern day. All of those things are the reality for us now. And so the representation in film throughout the 70s of all of these traditional places in which we used to find succor are now being undermined by the images of these films. You can't trust the police, you can't trust the government, you can't trust marriage, you can't trust all of the things that you were taught to trust. You definitely can't trust white people in blaxploitation films. And you can't trust the church. And so the Reverend here is represented as lying in bed and reading the Bible and completely ineffectual in the affairs of this material world. He doesn't come back in the film. He hasn't been there before. It's the only real mention of religion throughout the course of the film. And he's just sort of impeding any kind of investigation here. I'm a really big fan of any scenes in these films of spaces, private spaces, and by that I don't mean like someone's bedroom or bathroom or something. I mean clubs or restaurants or churches or any place where people of a community gather and are safe and accepted. And this. It's fascinating to me. These people have obviously been taught, told, instructed not to look directly into the camera, and you can see how desperately they're trying not to look in the camera. But when they're not thinking about being on film, there's a real unaffectedness here. Look at that. That's remarkable. You can't recreate that when you do a period piece. You say, I'm going to make a movie about Oakland in the 1970s. You can't actually get more realistic than this. Look at that dude sitting in the lower right there with the glasses and it's not recreatable and it's not castable. This is something that is just true. And, it may be his friends, it may be his family, or whatever, but they're all living in 1973. 74. You know, that was the year I was born. It's fascinating for me to watch this, to say, okay, look, this is what was happening at the exact moment I was popping into this world. And so what was happening in Oakland, and that's remarkable and not replicatable, you know. And so here's the style. I love the outfit, man. That is so cool with the Prince shirt and the very fly suit. The music is great, and in fact, this movie's restoration, if I understand correctly, was inspired by the discovery of the soundtrack on vinyl. I'm a huge vinyl collector, and I have not heard of the soundtrack, nor had I heard of the film, but as soon as I learned that little factoid, I went looking for it, and you know what? To find one of the rare promotional copies of that soundtrack, it's going for about $600. There was a reissue, and I can't even find a reissue, and I think the reissue is probably going for $300 or $400 at this point as well. So, a truly rare find that inspired a series of questions. And you know, I love these spaces, and I love that story, you know, and because it speaks to how strongly a cultural artifact Solomon King is. It is an absolute product of its time and its place and its people, and the music, the clearest expression of a people throughout human history and human development is our music and the stories that we tell each other. And you know, I've often said that film is maybe the most essential way that we tell each other as humans our stories, because we gather together in a dark cave with others in our community, and we tell the story of our cultures and our lives before a flickering light. So there's maybe something biologically hardwired, evolutionarily in us to accept stories in this way, in a way that's more immediate and essential than other ways of learning and hearing stories. But to know that this movie exists now in this form, and it was resurrected because of a question that was asked after the discovery of a soundtrack, is poetry to me. It's human poetry. This idea, like, as an archaeologist, somebody at Deaf Crocodile was digging in a crate and found this weird soundtrack and said, you know, what is this vinyl? What is it for even? And who has this? And then they think to reach out and find out that poor Sal Watts has passed away, but his widow, Belinda Burton, is still around, and maybe let's talk to her, and she has a copy of it, and I'm sure the story will be told better in more detail elsewhere on this disc, but there's something very beautiful about that, and it's reflected in the spaces that are captured within the film as well, these ageless, timeless spaces, you know. And I think now, whenever I see, you know, the band's just allowed to do their stuff for a while, I think of Walter Hill's films, you know, a director that I admire a great deal, who always lets the band play, and you know, he's the son of a jazz drummer. Now check this out here. Watch as this woman goes by, and look at her. Oh yeah, look, that's right. She knows what's going down. Nobody likes that lady. But yeah, Walter Hill was the son of a jazz drummer, and so in Hill's movies, what you'll see is in order to establish a time and a place and a culture, you know, where the scene's unfolding, or the character of a person. Look at this movie Crossroads, with the two competing honky tonks across from each other in Louisiana, where he just lets both of the bands go in both of the places, so you get to know these characters better, because you know what kind of music they listen to and what kind of crowds they're sort of mingling with and comfortable in, and what the crowds permit them to do in those spaces. You tell more by letting the audience in on what they listen to than you know, when you meet somebody, you go on a first date or something, you ask, what kind of music you like? You know, and everyone says everything. But when you talk more, they'll start to say, except for country or except for whatever. You start to learn about a person through the things that they love. A good question here is, what hold does this white woman have on him? You know, what is the what are these unspoken gestures and head nods? What's being communicated here? You know, here's his bodyguard, Samaki, played by Samaki Bennett, who sees, you know, kind of a nice bits of camera work here. yeah, a little cool action there with. It will never not be powerful in American film to see a black woman striking a white woman, and more than that, stomping her after she's down. Yeah, we don't have to see it. It is a. It would be violent in any context, but it becomes politically violent when it's a black woman striking down a white woman, and so there's something, I think, marvelous about that, about the image of that. All right, as more fighting goes on, perhaps a good time to mention one of the great scholars of black cinema in the United States, Donald Bogle. Everything that I know about this topic, almost everything, all the true things I know about this topic are because of Donald Bogle. He is a very important scholar in film, and in particular this area, black representation in film. His book, Toms, Coons, Mulattoes, Mammies, and Bucks, was published in 1973 and is now in its 4th or 5th edition, I think. It's a standard text, well worth the read if you've not read it, Donald Bogle. And in it, he talks about Sweet Sweetback's badass song, but it kind of applies to all of blaxploitation and the reaction to it. He says this: the fact that a black man met violence with violence and triumphed over the corrupt white establishment appealed not only to the mass black audience, particularly the black young who flocked to it, but to some white audiences too. Then, too, after decades of comic asexual black male characters and an era like the 1950s when Poitier and Belafonte, while considered sexually attractive, were rarely permitted to be sexually aggressive in their films, audiences were ready for a sexual black movie hero. So, again, there's echoes in my experience as an Asian American man in this culture as well, in the desexualization of Asian men. And that's a thing for Asian men that goes all the way back to the period immediately following the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad and this country's banning of Chinese immigration because of the threat that we allegedly posed to good working class whites in the United States with our industry. You still see that in the model minority myth if you think about it. Asians are efficient and they work hard and they're good at math. You know, the joke that Chris Rock told it during the Oscars a couple of years ago, and the joke again that he told at this year's Oscar after getting slapped by Will Smith, saying something along the lines of, here's a movie directed by one black man and 4 white men. Oh, there was another look at the camera, by the way, because, Solomon, he's kind of cluing us in that this is funny. In Dolomite, Rudy Ray Moore takes it to the next level. The blue comedian turned film star turns this to the next level where he'll look directly at the camera. He'll stop the film, he'll rewind it, like, let's look at that again. And can you believe this? He'll talk directly to us. And in a way, Saul Watts is doing that here. I think he's not doing it on purpose so much as he can't help it. And, that joy of it, that joy of creation is sort of remarkable. You can't fake this. It's great. But yeah, there's a long history of the desexualization of Asian men, and part and parcel, concurrent with that, echoing that, paralleling that, is the treatment initially of African Americans as the males being desexualized and the women being highly sexualized. This idea of black women not being able to walk down the street without being presumed to be a sex worker. In a similar way, Asian women are suffering greatly now in the United States and have been since the beginning as sexual objects rather than fully human beings. Again, in Solomon King, a film in which everyone's having a good time, you're having some of these issues being explored, and it's a really good thing. So a little bit more from my interview with Melvin Van Peebles back in the day. He said, If you look, man, you can see the emergence of the new N-word in Hollywood. You can see it coming from a mile away. American Indians were it for a while, now Asians, and now Arabs. Soon as it happens, you can feel the climate shift. It's a reflection in the movies of how a lot of America feels. No surprise who it is we go to war with here or abroad. It's people who we can comfortably make fun of in movies, and nobody says boo. All right, as the plot continues to move along, I want to read a little bit more from Donald Bogle's book. And again, he's still talking about Sweetback, but this is what he says. During the period of obvious social flux and of the evolution of a black cultural aesthetic, which insisted that black art give the black community some political and social direction, Sweetback seemed, for older members of the black intellectual community, to offer not direction, but a daydream of triumph. At heart, its hero, of course, was the familiar, brutal black buck. In some respects, the picture may be viewed as having fed white hysteria and paranoia, yet as a bold declaration of war that refuses to make concessions to please a white audience, the film enjoys jerking white audiences around and unleashing age-old fears. So Bogle, as he so often does in his work, really eloquently restates the entire debate that was happening in the black intellectual community around blaxploitation in this period in 1974, from 1972, really, from the very beginning of it all the way through. This idea that is it actually useful or helpful for a culture to be represented in a way that actually is stereotypical? Actually reinforces perhaps stereotypes of that the white culture may hold, or even creates new stereotypes with which the white monoculture can begin to further oppress and demean a culture. I think in the Asian American experience, I can speak to Bruce Lee as the only Asian American that most people can think of immediately. Maybe that's changing, even though our vice president currently, Kamala Harris, is Asian American. When I was growing up in the 70s, bullies would make Bruce Lee's yipping noises at me as a means to bully me, as a means to other me, when the only example they had of an Asian was this sort of supernatural, superhero kind of being. They would use that as the way to remind me that I was different. Part of the reason that I love the Bruce Lee portrayal in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is that, this is a film, talking about Tarantino again, who has been derided by Spike Lee and Denzel Washington, prominent members of our current black intellectual community, creative community, for appropriation. Some, I think, occasionally rightly so. But in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, what he does is he gives us back certain characters, certain icons from our own history, like Sharon Tate, who is the great innocent, the great victim that ends the 60s, along with Altamont and Woodstock and those things, but more definitively than anything else, her becoming a victim of the Manson cult declares the end of that period that we're talking about, that a period of assassination, the period of hope, the summer of love, however brief that was. When most people talk about the 60s, they're really only talking about 2 years, 1 year and a half. But he gives us back Sharon Tate as a human being, but he also gives us Bruce Lee as a human being. And the Asian American community did not, for the most part, react very favorably to that, because white audiences, when they were watching the film, reacted with laughter when Bruce Lee started making the noises. Even before he was, beaten up by the Brad Pitt character, he is making the vocalizations, and that is instantly funny to white audiences. And that should be something that the audience is interrogated for and questioned about. Not Bruce Lee, who had to be bigger and better. And so the black community also felt at this time, and still, that it wasn't good enough just to be black. They had to be exceptional to be accepted as equal in this society. That's, with so many cards stacked against minorities and an essentially racist culture. And so, using my experience, understanding that's not about me, but it's what I can understand, how I can find a way in, is that this concern that you're only portraying, one of the major articles at the time was something called, Shaft can get it all, but I can't get anything. Is this idea that doesn't really help a culture to portray on film, the most pervasive of mass media communication inventions the world has ever seen, other than television, I guess, is this, or the internet now, of course, is do you really advance the football in a meaningful way, in a positive way, to replace negative stereotypes with positive stereotypes? You're still not portraying a human in either instance, and you're creating a new set of problems that you cannot anticipate. Indeed, that's true. The counter-argument that Donald Bogle seems to be making eloquently, is that, okay, yes, but also, it is really nice to see Black Panther. It's nice to have a black superhero. For all the flaws inherent in that kind of representation, and all the flaws, speaking again of Shang-Chi, where, okay, we have a Chinese superhero, a Chinese-American superhero, that's great. But he's still a magical being with an immortal father, and that has not really moved the ball. Okay, so here's, vicious shooting, a shootout in the warehouse. What I love about it is that initially, one sort of squib goes off, and then he shoots him again, and nothing happens. And then when we switch back to him, the victim, we have another squib showing up. And I don't see that as a mistake, really. I see it as a victim of budget, that you couldn't maybe afford the second squib, or it didn't go off, and you couldn't afford to reset and do all that again, starting from scratch. So what they did was they just sort of corrected the mistake after the edit, and I'll take it, because that in that moment it expresses more care than anything in the last Jurassic World movie, Dominion. That movie is an example of not caring, of a lot of people getting involved, and there's nobody in control of it. This is a movie, for all of its faults, and a product of a vision, of one man's vision, and there's a certain kind of perfectionism in its imperfection. I don't want to let's not overstate it. I don't want to call this a great masterpiece of cinema. What it is, though, is it is indeed a certain masterpiece of, for Saul Watts, certainly, by the basest definitions of that word, but it is a great example of an artist like an Ed Wood. Or, we could even just go back into the history of black filmmakers with a figure like Oscar Micheaux. If you're not familiar with Oscar Micheaux, Micheaux was born in January 2nd, 1884. He was an author. I think he wrote 7 books. He was a film director. He was an independent producer. He directed more than 40 movies in his lifetime. I think maybe half of them have survived. He was not the first African-American filmmaker, but he's considered the czar of African-American films, I think is what someone has called him once. There was a motion picture company was created actually just to release race films, as they were called. It was founded in 1916. It was called the Lincoln Motion Picture Company. And it was founded by 2 men named Noble Johnson and George Perry Johnson. And they managed, in the course of 5 years, I think they were disbanded in 1921, They managed to release one short film called "The Realization of a Negro's Ambition" in 1916. It's lost. We can't see it anymore. Something like 70% of all of the silent films are lost. They were shot on nitrate and stored in not ideal situations. Here's Tito Fuentes, by the way, the San Francisco Giants infielder legend that I talked about, who was just a friend of a friend and agreed to come on. He's a big fan of this movie, Tito Fuentes is, because it's a time capsule for him. That's his actual son there. I love this sequence too. I really love this sequence. I watched it several times, where they're dancing, and they allow this dude to just dance the whole time, and he dances awesome, and everyone's having a nice time. It's a glimpse of utopia. It's a little interlude before the action-packed ending of the film. But anyway, the Lincoln Motion Picture Company produced The Realization of a Negro's Ambition, which is really about a middle-class African-American family, which is, it shouldn't be as rare as it is. If you think about all the African-American performers who have won Oscars, they generally fall into a couple of camps, either as performers, because that is what African Americans are permitted to do traditionally in this culture, or athletes, boxers or baseball players or what have you. I think Denzel won for being a corrupt cop as well, Training Day. Or, you could also be an enslaved person, and that'll get you some recognition too. So I'm being flip because I'm become cynical and jaded about the things about how much progress we're capable of making. But all the way back in 1916, there's the short film. They also did a movie called The Law of Nature, which I think is also lost. The Trooper of Company K, which may also be lost. It's interesting to me in a way that's not at all interesting. It's just obvious to me that in the devaluing of our film history, which was just common, until about the 1960s, when the French gave our film back to us as art, that we didn't really take care of film as legacy. It was just sort of a cheap entertainment for the working class, something that you could come in the middle of and watch 2 or 3 other ones and sleep through the rest of it. It's what you could afford, So the early film giants were people like, Alice Guy Blaché, who opened her own studio. They're women, and here's these guys opening a motion picture company, 2 black guys, and as soon as it became profitable, as soon as it became very clear that this was a way to make a lot of money, everybody get out of the way for the white guys. So anyway, they made 5 films. A Man's Duty, By Right of Birth was another one. I'm not going to be able to remember the last one, but they were disbanded. They couldn't keep going, even though a couple of the movies that they released were rumored to have grossed more than their contemporary films being released by Universal Studios at the same time. Even then, there was this awareness that there was needed to be a special outlet for black audiences. That insert shot, by the way, just right now of that castle, nobody really seems to know what that is. It's probably just stock footage that they found somewhere and shot there. It also makes no sense. I mean, that's a European castle for a Middle Eastern country, and this whole set looks like, a very colonial this is Orientalism, I guess I would say. But I think pointedly, again, these are actually just all white people. And so the struggle in this film, although we have this straw man of an Arab bad guy, really it's just the bad guys are white guys. As is so often the case. So anyway, Oscar Micheaux did a lot of films in his lifetime, and he was accused, and not studied because of this accusation. He's accused of not having a style, of being minimalist, of being sort of an Ed Wood, being a guy who didn't have any technical skills, didn't have any, he just had a theme that he kept pounding and a story he wanted to tell, just the one, but he told it 40 times, and he told it with his friends, and he stole shots, and the editing is primitive, and primitive this, and all of these coded racial terms without acknowledging a system that would prevent someone like him from, ever really truly thriving. It's never a question of talent. I think talent is evenly distributed among all races and genders. It's a problem of opportunity in the United States and everywhere, but in the United States, this is what we're dealing with. Is that a guy like Oscar Micheaux needed to be rediscovered, needed to be excavated, needed to be put back into our conversation as one of our great filmmakers, one of our important filmmakers. And if you've not seen any Oscar Micheaux work, I believe I know that there's a good box set of some of his stuff out there, and it does include a film that he made in 1920 called Within Our Gates, as was his practice. Just like with Solomon King, Oscar Micheaux directed it, he wrote it, he produced it. I don't think he composed the music for it, but I'm pretty sure he edited it too. And it was distributed by his own company. You know, he had his own company that distributed his books and his works and whatever. And so it is a remarkable film. It really, you must see it as soon as possible. As soon as you are done watching Solomon King for the second time now, you should look up Within Our Gates. It's widely considered to be a response to Birth of a Nation. And I think Micheaux refuted that. He said it wasn't about that. But it is a response, I think, at least in part to that kind of representation. It's also a response to the Chicago race riots of 1919. It's, I don't know, it's extraordinary. And he was, you know, he borrowed everything. He borrowed the costumes. He borrowed the skill of his people. You know, the guy who plays Prince Hassan in Solomon King is also credited as the makeup artist for this film. You know, there's just so much bleed through in all of these roles. Everyone had to pick up a hammer and get to work on these productions. Everyone believed in this one vision. It's really quite beautiful. But Within Our Gates has all of the alleged primitivism that people accuse it of having, but very much like my reaction to movies like Solomon King is that the heart of it and the spirit of it is so pure. It's so purely outraged, and it so desperately has something to say, and it's not a message movie. You know, I think arguably Within Our Gates is much more of a message movie than Solomon King, but rather the portrayals that are, even if they're accidentally honest, they're absolutely honest, even if they're accidentally honest. And you know, I even love that he's wearing kind of like that fedora here. You know, it's like these callbacks to other genres, like a cowboy hat, even. And Sweet Sweetback's badass song, the Melvin Van Peebles character wears a cowboy hat. You know, these are essentially, in a lot of ways, westerns. These revenge narratives to avenge a woman and have a showdown with the bad guy, and you know, or a Hoxian squad film like this is, like The Dirty Dozen or something, which is Aldrich, of course. But you know, when you gather up a group of your old Vietnam buddies and you still do things by the book. You still go to the man and you say, hey, CIA buddy, you cool with this? And, you know, there's this interesting subtext to a lot of these movies, too, in which, you know, like I'm thinking of Walter Hill again with a movie like Johnny Handsome, where the establishment, the police, the law enforcement sees an opportunity to solve a problem with another problem. They don't really know what to do with a guy like Solomon King, you know, a strong black man who doesn't want to come back to work for the white man. They don't really know what to do with him. And when he volunteers to go take care of this problem, you know, this oil sheik, yeah, go do it. I hope it's a suicide mission. And so there's this subtext as well, even in, you know, his being allowed to take on this responsibility. There's a subtext that there's a betrayal, an implicit betrayal of the friendship that he thinks, or, you know, maybe he doesn't think that strongly, but this is, you know, he relies on a grudging respect from O'Malley, and what O'Malley really sees him as is a tool. So there's that sadness in this film that is ultimately, you know, about empowering black men in American culture. To say, you know, this is a hero for us. It's a hero that we can look at and say, yeah, everything is stacked against us, but I'm respected in my community. I'm beloved by, you know, my family. I am doing the right thing for my country, even though my country never did the right thing for me. And it's that bedrock that blaxploitation, upon which blaxploitation is built, is this rejection of the idea of primitivism, this rejection of the idea that African Americans don't know exactly how unequal things are, and by the same token, they are not exaggerating the extent of their oppression. You can always tell when you strike a nerve when white people say that you're overreacting, or my favorite new All Lives Matter phrase is not everything is about race. It's like, well, just as all lives do matter, just as everything indeed is not about race, the people who say those things are clearly racist. So the defenses are old, and they're not just 1974 old, they're 1916 old. They're the beginning of the foundation of our country old, and we're having a real reckoning in 2022. And it feels like the first time, if you haven't been fighting it your whole life and you haven't been steeped in culture and cultural artifacts like Solomon King, which indeed communicate that these are issues that have been issues since the beginning. Here's Solomon King, who's a hero who is very smart and respected for being smart. And not only smart just in general, he is not just cunning, let's say. He's a very good businessman. He understands numbers. He understands how to run an oil field as well as he understands how to run a club. He knows how to treat people. He is socially adept. He is a good capitalist. He's an existential threat to the myth of white supremacy. That's what this movie is about without being about it. You must deal with that. So Saul Watts chose the name Solomon King as a flip of King Solomon, one of his favorite Bible characters. He in the Old Testament and in the Quran as well. He's the last ruler of an amalgamated Israel and Judah. He's the son of David and Bathsheba, the second son, the first one to survive, because I think I'm a little rusty on my Bible. David's first son, I think, is killed by God because David is an adulterer, to say the least. But so is Solomon. I mean, I think Solomon in the Bible has 700 wives and 300 concubines, which sounds really exhausting to me. But Solomon ruled from 970 to 931 BC, and he was renowned for his wisdom. He's the guy who, when two women were arguing about who a baby belonged to, said, well, why don't we cut them in half? You each get half of a baby. And the woman who said immediately, no, don't cut the baby in half, she can have them, was adjudged to be the true mother. That's the judgment of Solomon. Saul Watts loved that character. He loved the idea of a unifying force and a wise force and a force of reconciliation, perhaps. And I don't know if all of those things are self-evident in the film, but the threads that you can begin to pull when you're watching Solomon King are indeed, I think, nutritious. They lead to essential truths about what we see and are used to seeing in our film and what we're not. Even just looking at a guy sitting in his den and watching television, that's a middle class pursuit. That even the Cosby Show was an aspirational kind of blackness. This is not. This is just sort of, we get to see stuff in this. People running businesses, a liquor store, a diner, a fried chicken joint. We just see actual people. A stewardess, a hostess. We see people just doing jobs, and they're not drug dealers, and they're not, super in some way. There's this idea that you see, an Asian person in an American film, and he's going to know Kung Fu. He's going to break it out at some point, no matter who he is, and then you see, here's the wife, not in the film, in real life, Belinda Byrne, really a force of nature herself, getting her time in front of the camera. But, you're seeing representations in this film just casually, just as a matter of fact, because this is just his matter of fact, that we don't generally see. When you watch a Woody Allen movie, there's no diversity in New York, or Friends, or Seinfeld, to find less toxic examples, I guess, at this moment, but in history. But here you see a truly diverse and truly integrated society that should not be aspirational. It shouldn't be aspirational. But it is. And it still is. So, yeah. It ends on this, with us looking through a portal at the next adventure for the fledgling franchise, Solomon King, that was never to be. I want to thank everybody for asking me to come aboard and talk about all things as they came into my mind about Provoked by Solomon King. Please read Donald Bogle. Please track down Beyond Blaxploitation by Novotny Lawrence and Gerald R. Butters Jr. And thank you for supporting the right people. Deaf Crocodile is doing, and Vinegar Syndrome. They're doing the Lord's work. And I'll see you next time.
Hello, my name is Kevin Tudor, and I'm one of the 3 hosts of Almost Major, a film podcast dissecting many major indie studios and the films they released. Every week, myself, Charlie Nash, and Bryden Doyle discuss overlooked, forgotten, or bona fide classic indie films via studio-specific miniseries. We've previously covered numerous films from Artisan Entertainment, Lionsgate Films, and New Line Cinema. Titles including The Blair Witch Project, American Psycho, Dogville, But I'm a Cheerleader, Saw, Requiem for a Dream, and Ringmaster, the Jerry Springer film. Anyways, we have a fun time every week, and we hope you will join us. Subscribe to Almost Major wherever you get your podcasts. Now proudly a part of the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.
Thank you for listening. To hear more shows from the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network, please select the link in the description.
Step into the world of power, loyalty, and luck.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
With family, cannolis, and spins mean everything.
Now, you wanna get mixed up in the family business.
Introducing The Godfather at ChumbaCasino.com. Test your luck in the shadowy world of The Godfather slot.
Someday, I will call upon you to do a service for me.
Play The Godfather, now at ChumbaCasino.com.
Welcome to the family.
No